As we come to Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and let's go ahead and put it up on the screen. Here's what Paul says. He says that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose. Now, before we even talk about this passage very much, I want to remind you of a couple of things. Notice it says, and we know. Who's the we? The we there, those are believers. Those are people who have trusted Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. That's not speaking to anybody. It's speaking to the church. It's speaking to Christians. It's speaking to believers. He says, and we know that in all things God works for the good. Now, it says God works for the good. It does not say all things are good. We oftentimes, and there might be someone here in this service who might have a tendency to think, you know what, I love God, I go to church from time to time, I'm a good person, therefore nothing wrong should happen to me. Nothing bad should come into my life. There are a lot of times that I will hear believers or Christians say, you know, if you just love God, He'll protect you from everything. But the truth is, this passage, this verse doesn't say everything that comes into my life is good. Christians experience tragedy. Christians experience hardship. Christians struggle with certain things. Christians get cancer. Christians get Lou Gehrig's disease. Christians go through divorce. Christians have tragedies. Christians lose mom and dads and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. Christians lose their jobs. What should we say to these things? Well, this passage, Paul says, we don't step back and say, yay, but we can step back and say, you know what, in the midst of this tragedy in my life, I know God is going to do something good. God is up to something in this tragedy. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, back in July, how many of you were here the Sunday that I preached the message of the fiery furnace, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? How many of you remember that? How many of you remember that I told you the story that the day before, a member of our church, where they were in their house, and their house was struck by lightning, and their house burned down? How many of you remember that statement? I want to invite David and Susan Weidman to come on up, if you would. That house was David and Susan Weidman's house. And I wanted you to hear a little bit more of their story as they share. Who do I want to give this to? You better give it to you, shouldn't I? All right, go ahead and stand right there. In fact, I think we have a little bit of the video of the fire.
And as you look at that picture, you're going to see that the fire trucks are just sitting there. We're going to tell you why in a second. Our story probably began way before this. My kids are here today, but I have a 32 and a 30-year-old. When they were 2 and 4, we had a fire in our house. And so I tell you that because you need to know I knew what was happening. So on that Saturday, July 8th, I was sitting at the computer, and it was pouring rain. I heard lightning, and I thought, you know what? My house has already been hit. It's not going to hit me again. Lord, give me peace. And then all of a sudden, there was a huge explosion, and all the light bulbs in the house shattered, and I knew it had happened. And so I was there by myself, took my dog outside. I have a big 185-pound dog, took him to a neighbor's house, and I stood in front of my house, and I called the fire department. I did. First call was to the fire department, second one was to David. He wasn't there. And I stood in front of my house, and you could see the smoke start coming out. I'm very blessed that prior to this, there was a song that I just loved on the radio. And I'm not a very good singer, so I won't sing it for you, but it's Mercy's Me. And the verse says, I know you're able, I know you can, save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. God gave me that song as I stood by myself, just me and God, watching the house catch on fire. I'd been through it before, so I knew that I was going to lose my little children's handprints. I was going to lose pictures. I was going to lose a lot of things that meant a lot of things to me. And God said, these things, just like John Marcus said, it's my opportunity. What will I do? Will I trust in him alone, or will I let my fears take over? You see, I had to make a choice. It was me, God, and the burning house. As the tears rolled down my face, I said, you know what? My hope is in you alone.
Amen. David, you had shared with me, and you can give your reflection on the fire as well, and you weren't there, she mentioned that, but afterwards, you and I had a couple of days later, or actually it wasn't that long, a couple of weeks later, you and I had another conversation, as just talking to you. You kind of said, man, I've learned something through this tragedy. What was that?
Well, I was, in the past, I would be the guy that would call and say, hey, I heard about this or that, and you call me if I can do anything to help you. And it was kind of a way, really, I guess, kind of get off the hook, so to speak, and because we're all living such busy lives. And I think through this I learned that, hey, you just show up. People just showed up, and the body of Christ just showed up in an amazing way. And in fact, our insurance adjuster said to me, she said, I've been doing this for 27 years, and I've never seen the body of Christ move in such a way as I've seen in your house. And I want to thank you guys for that. But you just got to show up. You don't ask.
Yeah, that's a good word. Now, a couple of weeks later, I am sitting here in the way. If you don't know, the way we run our staff meetings here at the church is we're all fatigued and worn out on Monday, so we choose to put all of our staff meetings on Monday. That way we know there's going to be no creative energy on Monday from anybody in the staff. So we just kind of go in and we go from one meeting to the next. We're going to go get the administrative details out of the way on Monday. We're just kind of, if we're all going to look horrible, let's all sit in the same room, one meeting after another, and look horrible at each other. And all of a sudden I get news that within less than a month, a second family in our church has had their house struck by lightning and burned down. And so I want to invite Burton and Melanie. Where are they? They're the kids zone right over there. All right, kids zone. Burton and Melanie, y'all come on up. And probably as a crow flies, their house is about 3/4 of a mile from y'all's house. Maybe different.
Not even that.
Not even that far. Not even that far. And so this is Burton and Melanie. And on a Sunday night, y'all's house was struck by lightning. And I will tell you, it was Monday morning, early Monday morning, late Sunday night. I will tell you that I'm a little nervous standing right here because there's only one family that hadn't been struck by lightning. Yeah, is it one of those that's not supposed to? I might be the safest person in the room, but y'all better watch out. But tell us about y'all's experience. What happened?
So August 8th was a morning that we'll never forget. It was about 1:45 in the morning, and one of our dogs, not a 185-pound dog, but...
Yeah, that's a horse, by the way.
That's a horse, that's right.
Dog.
Anyway, one of our dogs jumped onto the bed, and when...
How many dogs do y'all have?
I'm not telling. Anyway...
A bunch. They're a rescue station.
There you Thank you, Taylor. Yes, anyway, so one of the dogs jumped up on our bed, and as I woke up, I smelled something, and it was a smell that I'd smelt before, but not in the same manner. It smelled like sawdust burning. And I said to my husband, I said, do you smell something? And knowing David and Susan for over 20 years, I've been very, conscious of the situation that they've been going through. And so I said, Burton, something's not right. So I ran to the front of the house. He took the upstairs, didn't see anything in the front, walked out the back door, and there was a little glow coming from our upstairs room. And so we have our 90-year-old parents living with us. I ran upstairs, pulled down the attic entrance, and whenever I climbed up the stairs just to look, of course I should never be doing that since my son-in-law is a firefighter, I went ahead and went up in the attic, and sure enough, I saw smoke. And I said, we've got to get out of here. Call the fire department. Tried to call the fire department, the landlines were down, but all the electricity was still on in the house. It was very odd. And so I got my cell phone, called the fire department, and again, this started at 1:45. By 2 o'clock, we had gotten all the dogs out, my parents, the two of us, and we're out in the garage when the fire department came. At that point in time, the smoke alarms just started going off. And we sat in the car for about 3 hours, just in panic. It was a panicked feeling, not knowing what was going to happen, what was next, what were we going to do. He was making all kinds of phone calls to our family members. I was trying to call my son that wouldn't answer my phone call in the middle of the night. And I know, what the heck, right? Yeah. Anyway, and so when daylight occurred, the fire department had finally packed up. My first call was to David and Susan, and it was at 7:15 in the morning, and I said, David. He said, Melanie? And I said, yeah. I said, we've got something in common. Our house burnt down. Can you come and talk to us? We need tips. We need to know what we need to do. And they said, we'll be there in 15 minutes. And sure enough, they were there in 15 minutes. And we spent, several hours that day, on and off talking, trying to figure out what to do. And then that afternoon, John Mark came. And he said, I think we know what we need to do. And I'll tell you this, as parents, if you've got youth in this church, all I can say is I have to applaud you all. On Wednesday morning, we had over 40, or at least 40, of the youth group of our church ascend on our house to help us do inventory. It was phenomenal. I have to give you all a hand for that. Thank you so much.
Give our youth a hand. And I can't claim all the credit for that, and I want you to know. And first of all, what a beautiful thought. One of the things David said he learned in this is I'm a guy that says, hey, call me if you need me. And he even told me on that phone call that day, he says, people don't call. They know you have busy lives. He says, you just got to show up. And sure enough, he just shows up. And he just shows up and was there. But we learned something. I learned something. In 22 and a half years as a pastor of a church, we've had people's house get struck by lightning. They would tell me their air conditioning went out or it blew their microwave out or something like that. Never anything like this. And so we had kind of watched, we had learned, I'd learned a little bit with David and Susan as the life groups would come over and people would come over and help y'all inventory. So by the time, sadly, it got to y'all, good news, we learned on them, I said, they need people. And I can't claim credit that there were 40 people. That's all Chase, our student pastor. I sent him a text because that happened to be the week that we're moving Jensen up to OU. And I said, Chase, they just need kids to come over. I said, can you get a couple to come over and help them move some things and inventory some things? And he says, I'll try to get a couple. Well, when I heard a couple, I was thinking, well, maybe I can add a little incentive to this thing. I said, well, listen, tell them if they'll go over there, the pastor will buy them lunch. And how many did you say showed up over there?
About 40.
About 40 kids, yeah. So really at the end of today, we're going to take a love offering up to cover lunch. And clearly, I don't know how passionate they were, but they liked food at least. But we thought they were, Chase said, how long are they going to be over there? And I said, boy, half a day or something like that. Just wear something you can throw away. And they got in there and knocked it out in how long?
About an hour and a half.
About an hour and a half, our kids descended on their place. And so got it all inventoried and taken care of. Let me, boy, as you think, when you're sitting there looking I'm going to ask you all the same question. When you're sitting there watching your house burn, and you mentioned paintings, pictures, the whole, for different generation, the watercolor ponies, going away. What perspective, what choices do you make in your mind and your heart as a believer in Jesus Christ that help you press through and use this to glorify God?
Well, for me, the first, you're just numb. I mean, you're just staring and you're just like, oh my gosh, the loss that you're focused on. And my son was standing next to me and he looked over, he said, hey, Dad, there's going to be a lot of eyes upon you to see, how you're going to handle this. And so for me, at that moment, it's like I shifted gears. It's like, okay, I'm choosing to keep my focus on the Lord and not on myself and not on my suffering. And that's what it's really all about, is just giving God the glory and let God be glorified through this. And so
I would tell you, I first have to say, I get to boast on my life group and my friends. I can't tell you, I'd walk into my house and they'd be packing up my kitchen. They'd be packing up, thank you, especially for someone who packed up all my bathroom stuff. What's there is a secret between me and her. But anyway, I was like, they're a good friend if they'll pack up your underwear and bathroom stuff. So anyway, what I would tell you is I have a little girl that works for me, and she's a young believer. Her name's Chris, and she said to me, "I'm so sorry, Susan. You and David are such good people. I'm so sorry. I can't believe the Lord would allow this to happen to you." And I smiled and I said, "Oh, Christina, you know what? This is a true blessing. Oh, you know it hurts and you know what I've lost. But you know what? One day I'm going to stand up there and hopefully he'll say to me, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant.' And he's going to say, 'When I gave you that fire, you used it to honor and glorify me. I know it was hard.' And you're going to be over there going, 'Well, God, you didn't give me a fire. I could have glorified you too.' But you see, we get the blessing. I have a nephew that's a missionary in South Korea. And as a kid, they'd have mission calls at church, and I was like, oh, no, I don't want to go somewhere. Well, you know what? God didn't send me to South Korea. He gave me a burned-down house, and that gets to be our mission field.
You mentioned, and then I'm going to ask y'all this as well. Susan, you may want to tell this story that you told in the first service. You were given an opportunity to go back and get some stuff, and I can only imagine. I mean, think about in your house if you were said, "Hey, go get what you need," and then get out. And so, what did you?
The fireman asked us. He said, "Is there anything I can go in the house and get?" And I said, "Well, I'd send you to get my pictures, but I don't know if they're ruined. So, they're kind of hard to find. And I'd send you for this." But I said, "Can we just wait until they'll let us go in?" And he said, "Okay." So they cleared the house, and they said, "Okay, we're going to go in, and you can go in and get a few things for the evening." So I go into the bedroom, and I get some makeup and some medicine and a pillow and some clothes. And I'm not sure where David is, and we come out 2 separate doors, and I'm carrying all my stuff, and here comes David with 8 gallons of Bluebell ice cream. I was like, really?
Attaboy.
That was him, so we had to put it in our kids' freezer.
All right.
8 gallons.
8 gallons of Bluebell. All right, you guys, when it comes, Burton, that's awesome, by the way. I'm glad they didn't caught up in the fire. When you think about you as you journey in this, no one says, "Hey, I hope I get woken up tonight by a lightning strike and my house is burned down." But at the same point, as believers, as Christians, is there a thought process? Is there something you've said, "God, use this somehow, some way, to minister"? What decisions are y'all making as y'all journey forward?
I think that for me personally, as I mentioned earlier, we've been friends with the Weidmans for about 20 plus years. Our boys played soccer together. David said something to me, and he even mentioned it a moment ago. I was that person also that I would text, "I'm so sorry about what's happened to your house. How can I help?" And a couple of days later, he responded back to me. I'd driven by their house several times, didn't stop, shame on me. Maybe that's why my house got burned down. But anyway, so what I've learned out of this is that don't expect them to reach out to you. If somebody is having a tragedy, just show up. Even if you just go by there, just a familiar face, "How can I help?" Bring water, whatever you want to do, but just show up. It's so important because if you haven't experienced something like this, it's so overwhelming, you don't even know where to start. I cannot tell you how many times I've moved the same thing over and over and over again, only to realize it's back in the same spot it started in. So, people helping out is so important. And if it's a scenario of just showing up and just saying, "How can I help? I'm here. Put me to work," that's the best thing ever.
Burton, you've got a thought?
Yeah, when we were the first day talking with Susan and David, people would come by and say the same thing. "How can I help? Just let me know. What is it that you need?" You're overwhelmed and devastated at the same time those first few days, so you don't know at that particular point. Well, Susan made a comment to one of our friends and said, "Anytime you come by, just bring water, Gatorade, and food. It doesn't matter what it is, just bring something, stay for a little bit, even if it's just conversation, but be there and act, not just taking a nice little text or a phone call. You can do so much more than just that."
Just do something. Now, y'all, we've already heard David. He went in and got the ice cream. Did y'all have any specific possessions that y'all wanted to drag out of there?
I'll say it. Okay. So as I mentioned, I had my 2 elderly parents. We sat in the car with several of our dogs and my mom and dad in my car for over 3 hours. And The only thing they kept asking for was their false teeth and their flip phones. So that was all that we went back into the house to get, was just that.
So obviously that happened. Life changed in a moment, and that's kind of where we are today with this message. Yours might not be a lightning strike. It might be a doctor's visit. It might be you get served by the lawyer that the divorce is coming or something that and it's not going to go away immediately. So when you think through this, how long before your house is rebuilt, repaired, where you'll move back in? What do you think it'll be?
A year and a half.
Year and a half. So they'll be in this for a year and a half.
But in that year and a half, that's our whole mission field.
That's your mission field.
That's it. We get a whole year and a half to talk to the carpenters and everybody who's coming.
Amen.
Bless
Now,
their heart.
What about you guys? How bless their heart. And you got some ice
Ma'am,
cream.
I've got to do some work.
Yeah. Now, how long do you think it'll be before y'all will be able to get back in?
It'll probably be a year. How long does it take to build a house, a new house?
Yeah.
It's a year at least. So
Wow.
you're displaced and you just work through it on a daily basis. One of the things David also said was, this is a big elephant, and it's one bite out of the big elephant a day. You just work through it.
Yeah.
And our motto this week that we've come up with is just one day closer to the end result. Getting into it's just temporary.
That's a good word. One bite of the elephant, you don't eat it all at the same time. One day closer.
Right.
And if you're in a struggle, I think that's what they would say is choose a perspective that you don't ignore the reality. This is horrible, right? I mean, this is horrible. There's no beauty, but you can choose in any situation to glorify God, and then you just press on one day at a time. One day at a time, one day at a time. Y'all give them a hand, and thank you all. Thank you all.